Let me welcome on my panel. I'm back with Rota of the Bastiat Society. Joining me is Pamela Geller of Atlas Shrugs 2000, blogger, political activist, Harry Binswanger of the Ayn Rand Institute, and our friend Katherine Mangu-War, managing editor for Reason. All right, that quote, "The state is the great fiction by which everybody seeks to live at the expense of everybody else," was yours, Pamela. Why?
Yes, because what is government? It creates nothing, it invents nothing, it produces nothing. And so the sole responsibility of government, at least in the case of the United States was the first moral government in the history of man that was based on individual rights. And the purpose of government is to protect and defend your life, your liberty, and your property, or pursuit of happiness, as it were. And so what you see here, and the rallying cry of Bastiat, was no legal plunder. This was his rallying cry. Again and again, he said, to the last breath that I take, no legal plunder. And when Ayn Rand said, I will not live for the sake of another man or have another man live for the sake of me, that's what government is doing. Government is enslaving. Government is taking, literally, legal plunder from one to another. And if you can imagine, and this I think was Bastiat's brilliance, when he talks about what's unseen. You know, the broken window, you break the window, look, but the glazier, he gets $6. But where would the $6 have gone?
The tailor?
And we should say this with the government. What's unseen? Imagine the trillions that might have been spent in the private sector, in business, in growing, in technology, in medicine. It's unimaginable what has been sucked out of the private economy. To what end? You notice that the left, the statists, the collectivists, never analyze. Like, let's look at these programs. Did they fail? Did they succeed?
They always need more.
They always need more. And it's always the fault of the most persecuted minority in the world, the businessman.
I got to go to Katherine Mangu-War on this. So we have the three forms of plunder, according to Bastiat. When the few plunder the many, everybody plunders everybody, nobody plunders anybody. But I have a fourth: when the many plunder the few. That's kind of what's happening with our tax code. We have so many people that are receiving from government and so few people that are responsible for paying for government.
Yeah, I think it depends on what kind of welfare alarms you most. There's certainly, the few plunder the many in the case of corporate welfare. We have incredibly powerful interests in Washington who are looking to pluck dollars from the general taxpayer rolls and use them for their own purposes. This is the guaranteed win that you were talking about earlier. And that's just as much of a problem as the many plundering the few in the case of essentially taxation.
You know, it's funny, when we were joking earlier about the petition of the candle makers to block out the sun. That's what rent seekers do when they go to Washington. They say they believe in capitalism, but then they go to Washington and look for concessions from politicians who will put up barriers to their competition.
And why does it work? It works because the public is indoctrinated with collectivism, with sacrifice to the needy, to the poor, to the struggling who somehow can't make it on their own, even though they made it on their own throughout this country's whole history. So the only reason that the lobbyists can get away with it is the bad philosophy that permeates our culture.
You know, it's funny, we're watching Venezuela. You see a president who built his empire on taking from the productive sectors to give to the poor, which is always seen as noble. But when you build an entire society on a recipient class, there's almost no going back. And the word proletariat that Marx used has become the victim. Whoever the victim is. We're not even talking about people who might be in unsafe working conditions. It's anybody that needs the force of government to better themselves. And in the case of Venezuela, they have built such a recipient class that the next leader is going to have to promise even more, which is going to bring them a collapse.
Right. So it's kind of fortuitous that you're mentioning Venezuela, because last night we just had a Bastiat meeting, and we had two economists who spoke. First economist talked, to your point, around, you know, he did a lot of econometrics for the governors of New Jersey, and they weren't interested in anything that he was putting together. As far as the numbers goes, they just want to know what was the political risk. So that's what he was telling us. He was telling the business people, not interested in all these numbers, especially when he was using a lot of the Austrian economic principles in his analysis. But then he had another economist there who was from Argentina, and he was a socialist. That's what he did down there. That's how he was taught. And he told us last night, we didn't talk about Bastiat. We didn't know who Friedman was. We just studied Keynesian economics. That was it. And we had extraordinary inflation, so lots of problems. They ignored the business people, right? So he's telling the business community that we had last night this exact story. And he came here to the U.S. to study further, and that's when he heard about Friedman and some other Austrian views. And that's when he went, and then after he graduated, he went back to Argentina and said, wow, everything's backwards. He had this big realization. Why are we printing so much money? So the Bastiat Society wants to bring this to light to the business people, because the business people, we're there to make wealth happen. And it is redistributive in the right way, because you get to make choices. Right.
Based on mutual
You get to make choices, right. It's not a flat redistribution.
We were talking earlier about why this caught on with academia. This is my copy of the Communist Manifesto. You can see it's old and it's dog-eared. But Bastiat the Law, which, if you think about it, 1848, 1850, in today's era, that's a Twitter response. So here was communism flourishing throughout Europe, and you had this one lone voice saying, hey, wait a second, this might be a bad idea.
The voices of unreason had captured the universities. Philosophers, from David Hume to Immanuel Kant in particular, had been pushing an irrationalist philosophy, and a philosophy that said man cannot pursue his self-interest. Bastiat says that man should pursue his self-interest. He says that the interests of men are harmonious. But Hume attacked it from one side, attacked that idea from one side, saying there is no such thing as morality, as just pleasure and pain. And of course, if people are motivated just by pleasure and pain, grab what they can for the moment, their interests conflict. And Kant, from the other side, said duty, duty, duty. And he was the father of fascism and Nazism. So the ground was sowed for someone to come in and say, you can't use your mind. You have to follow the dictatorship of the proletariat. And that was Marx.